I'm Hannah, nice to meet you, and I'm the student pastor here along with my husband, Henry, who's just down there, little wave. But yeah, we're the student pastors here, which is a new appointment for us, and we are just very, very, very excited that if you are here and you're a student, we want to know you. Delighted to be speaking on Arrivals Weekend, this weekend. Sussex definitely moved in this weekend. Did Brighton move in as well? Anyone know? Wow, you can hear a pin drop. Yes, we're getting a nod from the front. So Brighton and Sussex unis both started. BIM, other colleges in Brighton. If you're at any of them, come and find me at the end, because I'd love to meet you. And I actually moved here 12 years ago tomorrow as a fresher, as a little fresher. Yeah, a little clap there, thank you. And I remember, you don't need to clap that. I remember driving up with my mum, grew up in Plymouth, driving up and seeing the sign, Sussex University, turning in and just thinking, oh my goodness, my life is moments away from totally changing and I do not know what to expect. It was that final drive through the campus to East Slope. I'm not doing good with my audience participation, but does anyone live in East Slope? No! Okay, well, East Slope at the time was a very, very, very how do you put it nicely, very run-down accommodation that they've since bulldozed and rebuilt, and apparently it's one of the nicer ones. But I remember arriving thinking, I've got these housemates I don't know anything about. I don't really know much about my course. I was kind of winging it a bit. But I just knew that it was going to be a significant time in some way. And it was both and. Wildly exciting, sense of possibility, but also kind of fear, dread, trepidation. What have I started here? But 12 years later, I'm still here. I loved it. If you're new and you've moved to Brighton, get ready. It's the best. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. My life will never be the same because of moving here. And I guess all that is just to say, it's not related to my talk really, it's just to say if you're here and you're a student, maybe you're sat next to your mum or your dad who've brought you here, I get it. And my prayer is that this place maybe will feel like home for you. Just like it did for me, that you'll feel seen and known and loved in your time here. Because really, that is the desire right at the heart of the human experience, is to be known, to be loved, to be seen. I know she's not exactly like a British icon, but I'm a very big fan of Oprah Winfrey. There she is, beautiful lady. She just glows, she looks amazing. But she's basically famous for being an extraordinary interviewer. And I love listening to her interviews. She does one in particular with Maya Angelou, the author. It's just beautiful. But she gets right to the heart of people. And she's interviewed over the course of her career about 40,000 people, she reckons. It's a lot. It's like her bread and butter. But she says that there is a commonality in every single person that she speaks to, whether it's Barack Obama, Beyonce, someone on death row. It's do you see me? Was that okay? How was it? How did I do? At the end of every single interview, they'll turn to her and ask those same questions, like, was that all right? And I guess, like I said, this is the common denominator of the human experience, is that we all want to know that what we do matters. We want to know that who we are, what we say, matters. And maybe you're here feeling a little bit anonymous this morning. Maybe you don't know very many people here. Or maybe you've moved into a flat full of new people you don't know yet. Maybe life circumstances have left you feeling just a little bit hidden or unseen. Maybe it's just a season of life you're in, you're caregiving or parenting. Maybe things that aren't so celebrated. But really we're asking the same question, do you see me? And that's what we're going to look at this morning, being seen by God. And we're going to go to the Old Testament, Genesis 16, and it's the story of a woman called Hagar. And it's a story about being seen by God. It's about a God who sees us and a woman who trusts in the God who sees her. And through this story, God reveals three things: that he sees our struggles, that he sees our strengths, and he sees our future story. So Genesis 16. A bit of context, a few chapters earlier, God has placed a call on the life of a man called Abram. He's an old man, and he's just been told by God that he's going to be made into this great nation, that there's going to be, people are going to be blessed through the generations to come through him. God promises Abram that he's going to have more ancestors than there are stars in the sky. It's pretty big in terms of like the biblical story. It's a pretty significant moment. And then we get a few chapters down the line and reach the story of Hagar. And I guess it's a bit of a tricky passage. I'm going to do my best, but as we get through it, there's a lot of there's discomfort in this passage. So just go with me. Genesis 16. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. Bear in mind, this is after a promise of multiple generations coming from this man. She'd borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. And so she said to Abraham, "The Lord has kept me from having children, so go and sleep with my slave, and perhaps we can build a family through her." Abraham agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and they conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abraham, "You are responsible for the wrong that I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your slave is in your hands," Abraham said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, and so Hagar fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And the angel said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai," she answered. The angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "Now you're pregnant, you will give birth to a son, and you shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He'll be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility towards all his brothers." And so she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well was called Bir Lahai Roi. It's still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abraham a son, and Abraham gave the name Ishmael to the son that she had born. Abraham was about 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Okay, there's a lot in there, isn't there? There's a lot of discomfort, just tricky things in there. But what is very clear is that Hagar is in a terrible situation. She's enslaved, she's mistreated, she's pregnant not by choice, and she's fled what life she knows because it's too much for her to cope with. The reality of the desert, of the wilderness, is better than the life she's leading. Her identity's been stripped away, she's weak and vulnerable and alone, and she finds herself in the middle of the wilderness, miles and miles from home. It's really, really bad. But then God shows Hagar that he sees her. We read, "The angel of the Lord found Hagar and says, 'Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from? Where are you going?'" And this encounter is significant because he calls her by name. In his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie wrote, "Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound." And we see God in this passage using this messenger to call Hagar by name. How special do we feel when someone remembers our name? I have this complex where I just think people are going to forget my name. And then when they say it back, there's just something so significant about being known by name. Well, imagine if you were miles and miles from anyone you knew, in the wilderness of all places, and out of nowhere you hear your voice being called. It would make you feel so known. It would be the sweetest sound. And it's the only instance in the whole Bible in which a woman is called by name by God. And what's even wilder is that commentaries say that this is the only known instance in all Near Eastern literature in which a deity addresses a woman by name. The only instance, and it's Hagar, this girl fleeing into the desert. So he calls her by name, but he also recognizes her situation. He says, Hagar, slave of Sarai. He recognizes that she's been enslaved, that the reality of her situation is terrible. He doesn't overlook it. He doesn't push it to one side. He knows that her identity has been compromised. But despite her circumstances, this girl trapped in slavery in the middle of the desert is the first person in the Bible to be visited by a divine messenger. It's her, it's Hagar. She's the one that God chooses. And fair enough, Hagar is stunned. Her response shows that she's stunned. Stunned, God noticed her. The gods that Hagar will have grown up with in Egypt, the gods of Egypt, would never notice somebody like her. In order to get the Egyptian gods to notice you, you'd have to kind of climb up the priestly ladder. You'd have to kind of pay your way to attention. But God notices Hagar, lost in the wilderness. He sees her. And if he sees her in these circumstances, then why not us? Why not you? We're not excluded from this. And by noticing Hagar, God shows us that he sees our struggles. To be clear, these struggles that Hagar was facing were not her fault. Some of the struggles that we will face are not our fault. Hagar is subject to abuse and enslavement. These struggles have led her to flee. It's not her fault. But then some of the struggles that we face are just part of being human. I'm sure there'll be all sorts of things in this room that we would really rather nobody knows, that we'd rather just kind of put neatly in a box and put somewhere else. We kind of cover them up. I think we do it kind of, it's a cultural thing. It's like, let's just hope that no one sees that I think that way or I do that thing or there's that thing I just don't want anyone to know. But as much as we might try to hide our struggles from other people, God sees. We can't hide them from the one who sees us. And this might be a terrifying prospect. That might be like, ooh, sicky feeling in my tummy, like, ooh, God sees those things. That God would see the details of our lives. That might be really confronting. But God's not afraid of our struggles. God's not surprised by our struggles. In fact, he walks with us in them. He comes towards us in them. He counsels us through them. He's faithful to forgive us for them. And in fact, more than that, we read in the book of 2 Corinthians in the New Testament that God's power is made perfect in our weakness. That blows my mind. God's power is perfected in our weakness. His power is made perfect in your loneliness. His power is made perfect in your grief. His power is made perfect in your sadness, your fear, your pain, your struggles. It's made perfect in that. And when we realize this, that God sees our struggles and that his power is made perfect in them, it sets us free. We're free from unrealistic expectations to be a certain way, to look a certain way, to think a certain way. We get to just come to God as we are. We're set free to come to God exactly as we are and let him love us in that. He sees our struggles, but he also sees our strengths. Again, depending what kind of person you are, this may fill you with dread. Someone noticing you doing good things. Much like me. You know, I love to fly under the radar. I just, don't give me a microphone, don't give me a platform. You know, I never want anyone to know the good things that I do, like, for example, some people might even already know this, but not through me, because I wouldn't tell anyone this, that actually the best essay I ever wrote, I got 100%. 100%. I don't tell people. I don't want people to know. I don't want you to be thinking about that later. But it was A-level English. That's a subjective subject, I'd say. 100%. World War I poetry. 100%. That's faultless. I mean, come on, like, I don't need the applause. I don't need the applause. I hate it. Don't look at me. I don't need the approval, but joking aside, I am one of those people who, you know, if I do something good, I want people to know. I want to be just given a pat on the back or a little well done. I'm the kind of person who likes I'm a people pleaser. Maybe you are too, but I feel like either way, there's a danger when we live our lives seeking the approval of others. When we stop doing that, when we stop seeking validation from other people and find our worth in God noticing our strength, we become satisfied. It makes us secure when we know that God, who sees us and loves us and celebrates us. It gives us a security because we know that his opinion is the only one that actually counts. And that's what we see in Hagar. This true humility and satisfaction. Lots I can learn from this lady. True humility and satisfaction in God noticing her. And in this encounter, she receives this blessing that is very significant. It's much the same blessing that Abraham received a couple of chapters earlier, that her descendants are going to be too numerous to count. That's huge. And yet she just receives it and faithfully commits herself to God's plan for her life. Knowing that God sees our strength makes us secure, because then we're free to even do the secret, hidden things that no one else sees, because it doesn't matter if anyone else sees us. Jesus even talks about this in the New Testament, in the book of Matthew. He says, God, your Father, sees what is done in secret. God sees it. The King of the universe, the creator of heaven and earth, takes notice of you. He sees the ordinary moments, walking your friend back home at the end of a night out, the tea, bath, and bedtime for the 100th time, coming and serving at Safe Haven on a Saturday night, the late night hours that you took in the prayer week, those sacrifices that you've made that you thought maybe no one saw. God saw it. God sees it. He sees the quiet strength and he takes notice. So he sees our strength and it brings us security. And then finally, he sees our future story. I have spent more time than I care to admit worrying about the future. I swear there's kind of a whole section of my brain that is kind of like future plan anxiety. It's, you know, and I know when this takes hold because I have what I would call sleep concerns, not nightmares. Sleep concerns, I think, is the right level of description here. I had sleep concerns about the students arriving because I have dreams that you've arrived and I wasn't prepared and then everyone gets here and I don't know what's going on. That's the kind of level of concern. It's not a nightmare, if you see what I mean. But over the years, these sleep concerns have been exquisite. Henry knows. Oh my goodness, poor guy. One time, I woke up in the night, I put my jeans on, and I just got back into bed. That was like a low-level sleep concern, don't know what was going on there. Another evening, in the middle of the night, I woke up, painted 1 foot worth of toenails with nail varnish, and just got back into bed. There is a photo, I couldn't find it. If I find it, no one wants to see it. But it's one very well-painted foot of toenails. That sounds like a nightmare, a foot of toenails. And then the worst / best was, I don't really know why I'm telling you this. In second year of uni, I hung, in the daytime, I put a new bird feeder out my window to see all the birds. In the night, however, I opened my window with a pair of scissors in my hand, climbed out the window, cut the bird feeder down, brought it inside, put it on the side, went back to bed. Woke up in the morning, opened the curtain, no bird feeder. It's on the side in my room, scissors on the bed. So again, I don't know what I'm concerned about there. Don't read into it too much, but it manifests in worry about things. It can get in there. We can be so worried about all sorts of things. And if you are tackling anxiety together, evening tomorrow, come to that. But I'm sure we all have things that weigh on our minds, things that keep us up in the night or kind of manifest in certain ways. But in Genesis 16, we read that the angel and Hagar have this conversation about her life in which the angel tells her to go home to her mistress, which must have been terrifying. But he also promises her son, and like I said, much the same blessing that was promised to Abraham a few chapters earlier. God sees her future story. He sees the plans that he has for her, and it brings her hope. And it's true for us too. We can be hopeful because we can trust in the God who sees us exactly as we are. He knows what's best for us. He knows what we need. We don't need to strive. We don't have to worry. We can have hope. God sees our future story and it brings us hope. So he sees our struggles, it brings us freedom. He sees our strengths, it brings us security. He sees our future story, it brings us hope. And then this story of Hagar ends in the most beautiful way, with Hagar naming God. And again, this is really significant. Hagar is the only person in the Bible, male or female, who names God. She's the only person to give God a name. And the name that she chooses, El Roi, a Hebrew term that means the God who sees me. She knows that she has been seen by God. He's seen her struggles, he's seen her strength, he sees her future story. And the amazing thing is for us here in this room is that we don't just have this story to look back on to show us that God sees us. God sent a messenger into the wilderness for Hagar, but he sent Jesus into the world for us, our own personal story of being seen. Sending Jesus into the world for us, the gospel, is the ultimate demonstration that God sees us. Jesus came in human form and walked amongst us, lived a life to show us how to live. And he sees everything that we go through. He lived through struggle. 40 days in the wilderness, persecution in his lifetime, oppression, and ultimately a death on the cross. Jesus has demonstrated great strength. He lived a perfect life in great strength. And Jesus saw the future story before him as he laid down his life on the cross to give us eternity with him. Jesus came for you. Jesus sees you. He is the God who sees. And we're going to respond today, like James said, by taking communion. And in communion, all of this kind of comes together. Kind of the truths of this passage are focused in on. We come up to receive the bread and the wine as individuals, and we receive the promise of God's love, of God's grace, of God's kindness, of God's forgiveness afresh. And James is going to lead us through some words. And as you do that, I just encourage you to remember again that you're coming into the presence of the God who sees you. There's nothing that's hidden from him, nothing too much for him. Let yourself be seen by him. So would you like to stand? And I'll pray for us before we do that.